this bear was thought of as a monster, and it was like incomprehensible. And I kept saying, no, I want to understand why. And people kept saying, that's impossible. You're not going to ever know why. And I couldn't accept that.
I'm Nathan Maharaj, and this is Kobo in Conversation. My guest is Claire Cameron, author of the novels The Bear and The Last Neanderthal. Her new book is called How to Survive a Bear Attack. It's a memoir of family, of illness, of love, and the author's ongoing fascination with a 1991 bear attack that happened in a wilderness she knows quite well. Claire Cameron, welcome to Kobo.
Thank you, Nathan.
We need to start with this bear attack. Can you just tell us what happened on Bates Island in October of 1991?
It was a Friday night, and this was Canadian Thanksgiving, so long weekend. And a couple drove from Toronto. They went north and went to the Opeongo store, which is Opeongo's the biggest lake in Algonquin Park. And they set off for the long weekend in a small motorboat. And when they got to the island, they started unpacking and getting ready. And at some point, no one else was there. They were attacked by a bear, a black bear. And then no one heard from them on the Tuesday. They didn't report in for work or home. And that's when their family and friends called the authorities, and there was a search. So the search party found their remains 5 days later.
How did you hear about this story? Did it reach you immediately, or is it something you discovered?
It was on the front page of the Globe. I remember that very clearly because we were subscribers, so it came to my house. It caught my attention especially because I'd worked at a summer camp at Algonquin Park the year before. And I'd been through Lake Opeongo, so I could imagine it. And I was going to work there the summer after. So I read every detail in this article, as you can imagine. Because at the time I thought of black bears as sort of like overgrown raccoons. I had no idea that they had this capability. So it shocked me. But the article didn't have very much information. I think it's hard to report on bear attacks that, the people the journalists are often in Toronto. And no one knows what happens initially. So this article came out, a couple days later. There's very little about what actually happened.
Mm-hmm. How much do you remember of those details that you found wanting? Do you remember where those gaps were?
I remember reading that the bear had been shot. I had no... So to that point, I'd seen bears around camp and at a friend's cottage and that sort of thing. But this bear, I think it was described very specifically as... I know. It was 308 pounds of black fury. And I was like, what? So that's more like a demon or a monster.
Yeah.
And it did not match the little bears I'd seen running around the garbage or licking a barbecue.
Mm. You wrote a book about that attack in a way.
Yeah.
Your novel, The Bear, a book which... I should state for the record, I read while on a camping trip with my family when my children were definitely bear snack size.
Right.
And I regretted my choice almost immediately.
Perfect little morsels.
I kept reading it, but I knew I was doing myself no good.
Yeah.
It is a great book, which is, even in the face of horror, I kept reading it. You write, though, in this memoir, How to Survive a Bear Attack, that in writing The Bear, you had hoped to write your fears away. Did it work?
So I mentioned the summer camp I worked out. I went the next summer after the attack. So in 1992. And there I was asking everyone I knew about the bear attack and what had happened because I wanted to get more of a, it almost seemed like a nightmare, not something that actually had happened. So I heard stories that were told around the campfire, almost like ghost stories. And every different person I asked had a different little fact. So one, for example, was that there was a broken paddle found at the front of the campsite when the search party pulled up. Mm-hmm. And, that kind of lingered in my mind. And then another that I heard several times was that a tray of ground beef had been found at the campsite on one of the rocks in the ring around the fire. Mm-hmm. And that it was untouched. but the bear was at the campsite when the search party arrived. And that just stuck with me. But I couldn't quite make sense of those details. They seemed significant, maybe, but I had no sense of the bigger picture. So it was actually when when my kids were small, and I was taking them up to Algonquin Park for a canoe trip. Just before I went, those details started to play a little bit more in my mind. And so that was sort of where the bear came from. It came from more sort of a hazy nightmare ghost story rather than anything factual.
Yeah, it's as you described it just now. It is a nightmarish thing because had it been eaten, it felt like that would have been an explanation for something. Like it would have made more sense.
Completely. Because we all know bears love food.
Like we're supposed to hide your food and the bears won't come.
Exactly. So the ground beef implies that the bear wasn't after the food. And you sort of know that intuitively, but it took me a little while to be able to actually articulate that.
Yeah. As you've said, black bears are not overgrown raccoons. They're also not grizzly bears. There are a lot of not things. They're strange creatures. They're not strange creatures. They're exactly the creatures they need to be. I'm sorry, black bears. Don't cancel me. But I guess it's really hard to calibrate a reasonable quantity of fear in the face of them. I think they're
so true.
They're enigmatic in that regard. Is that part of the appeal?
They're mysterious. I think partly because we make them mysterious. So this black bear that attacked this couple, I thought of as sort of at the time and since I'd heard people talk about him as an anomaly. Like for instance, after the attack, an autopsy was done, a necropsy as they do on animals, and his head was cut off and sent for testing. They were wondering if there was going to be a lesion on his brain or something like that. Actually, at the same time, and sharing the front page with the bear, was a guy named George Hennard, who was committed one of the first mass killings in Texas at 2 days before this bear attack. So for some reason, I just got into George and started reading about him. And I think he killed 19 people or something. For the time, it was a huge mass killing. And the treatment of him was so similar to this bear. They also tested his brain for lesions or something, and he was talked about as a monster. And for both the bear and George Hennard, people said, we will never understand what happened with this attack in both of them. And the language was just so similar. But actually, this bear, it's abnormal behavior. It doesn't happen, but it's absolutely on a range of understandable behavior, is what I found writing this book.
I love that you went there because a big part of this book is this thread you weave of understanding that behavior as what you've described as understandable behavior. Essentially, you've tucked in this like short speculative fiction of this bear's season. Really, I guess.
Yeah, a year. It starts when he wakes up from hibernation.
Yeah,
and then goes through the year. Leading up to the moment he attacked.
Yeah. Well, how did that show up in the book? Because this is a book about a lot of things that are very personal to you, and then we have this narration that you had to fully imagine. Is that just the novelist getting restless about you and those darn facts?
Yeah. So actually, that part came very last, and it was the only time when the book started to work. So I had done enough research to know that the couple were blameless in this attack. They had groceries, they had food, as do millions of other people that go into wilderness
we all
spaces.
do.
Yes, it's just part of it. So there was a lot of speculation at the time that they had mishandled their food and they'd brought the attack on. But I knew that wasn't the case by the time I started writing this book. So, but then I met with this biologist, Jeremy Inglis, who I worked with a lot. And he's a bear biologist, and he's followed many black bears all around Algonquin Park. And he almost didn't grant me an interview because he heard the premise of my book, and he said, "Are you going to treat this bear like a demon?"
Right. Is this going to be Jaws?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No disrespect to Peter Benchley.
No, because I remember when my novel The Bear came out, People magazine had this big headline, was like, could do to bears what Jaws did for sharks or whatever. And there was actually a mass slaughter of sharks after Jaws.
There
Like it was
was.
quite a serious.
Yeah.
Because that shark, I'm going off track here, but I reread Jaws, and that shark is treated like a machine, a killing machine. And this book is actually partly a reaction to Jaws, because you can spend time around any animal, and especially any animal that hunts. They clearly have well-developed cognitive abilities. Anyway, that was my sidebar about Jaws. But so he asked if I was going to treat this bear like a demon, this biologist, and I realized that I had this innocent couple, and I was talking to their friends and family, so I feel I knew them in some way and had quite a lot of empathy for them. And then, so if I'm telling this story, there's innocence, and then what? Is there a bad guy? You know what? And so before I started writing The Bear, that's kind of how the book read. And it was actually when I found a photo of the bear that changed. So there was this dusty archive in Algonquin Park, under the visitor center. And in there was a photo. Someone had saved it from a local paper. The bear is lying on his side. He looks really healthy, glossy coat. And I could almost imagine, putting my hands on his coat. And the picture looked very fresh, like he'd just been killed. And I just could almost sense the life in him. And that's when the bear became an individual to me. Rather than thinking about black bear behavior, I started thinking about that particular bear.
Speaking of monsters humanized,
Yeah.
you write about Beowulf in this memoir. It's an important piece of literature to you, but it's important in an interesting way because it's not out of reverence. It's almost like it's important for its utility.
Right.
Right. Like you come back to it. It's a useful, well-worn tale that gets altered with each telling. It's very much like part of the oral tradition of your family, like Beowulf. Like let's pull out Beowulf and the monsters again. Can you tell me, when was the first time you heard the story of Beowulf and the monster Grendel?
So my father was an Old English scholar, and he actually spoke Old English in this. I mean, they don't know the accent people used exactly, but he had this, they have approximations, and he had this very guttural
I'm
way
sure
of
he sounded
and it's
amazing.
and he was 6'5", so it was also kind of like amazingly terrifying in the best way. But he used to tell me Beowulf as a bedtime story. So he told me that, and it's a story that's from, when most of society wasn't necessarily reading and writing. So it was a story that was probably mostly told around the campfire at night, by scribes or by oral storytellers. So he told it's a story with 3 monsters, and they're each progressively scarier. And my favorite, though, was Grendel, the first monster. And he used to tell me all about Grendel at bedtime. And that was, it must be where my monster fixation comes from, I think.
I read my boys Michael Morpurgo's novelization of Beowulf
when
they were little. And, Beowulf, and then...
Well, it has shiny cups, swords, dragons. It has everything, yeah.
My youngest son got a foam sword when he was like 4, and he called it Hrunting.
Oh, that's exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, because it was like, that's the sword.
I have such a memory of stabbing the pillow. And exactly. Yeah.
You've said that you wish you had both created and were Grendel. And this is me reading one of those interviews where somebody rapid fired some questions at you. So maybe you felt differently like the same afternoon. But do you feel that way now?
He's a monster I identify with. But interestingly, in writing this book, Grendel's the first monster. He's like, he comes to the mead hall and gets in a fight with Beowulf, and Beowulf actually rips off his arm and hangs it above the door, which, terribly humiliating. And Grendel's mom has to come and get the arm for him. And so I think my young mind identified with Grendel. But so there's Grendel's mom is the second, Grendel's mother is the second monster. And then the third is this fire breathing dragon who is more like an existential threat, who's like burning down all the houses in the land. And she comes after a long period of peace. And I started to identify with that more as I wrote the book, I think in a more mature stage, and perhaps having been diagnosed with cancer, I was looking at an existential threat myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interwoven throughout this memoir is, as you say, it's your story of cancer. Your dad died of cancer at the age of 42, which is stunning to me, because as I was thinking about asking you this question, the two of us would be sitting here older than your dad got to be.
It's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that if he were to join us at this table, he would kind of be the whippersnapper a little bit.
Certainly younger than me. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And younger than me too, for the record, just, was writing about your dad's illness and your own cancer, was that about outrunning a fear as well, or was it something else?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I was, my dad had melanoma, which is the most deadly kind of skin cancer. And he had it in the 1980s, and it metastasized. And so he had chemo and all that sort of thing. And in the 1980s, the chemo regimes were, it was like being hit with a flamethrower. Yeah. So he died a really hard death, I think. And I remember him very well from that time. And then I was diagnosed at 45. So, fairly soon after, found out that it was genetic. So I had the same thing as him. And it was impossible for me to think that my fate was anything other than the one he had suffered. So not only a death, but a really hard death. And the 3 years in between us at that time felt like, luck or a given.
Yeah.
Because I was diagnosed with I had melanoma on my shoulder, which I'm young for that, but I also had 3 other instances. So having 4 is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unusual. So I just felt like my time was very short and the end was going to be horrible.
As you described that, it reminds me of when Salman Rushdie was assaulted a few years ago, and that he writes in his memoir of when he saw that young man mount the stage coming at him with a blade, he thought, "Oh, it's you."
Yeah.
That there was this moment of inevitability. There was a moment of recognizing inevitability. Is that a feeling you were kind of carrying? Like, I wonder if when the diagnosis hit you, it was a feeling of, "Oh, it's you."
Okay, so yes, but I actually always, in the back of my mind, even though I know how rare bear attacks are, I really actually thought I was going to be attacked by a bear. I had some, and it's ridiculous. I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because one person a year dies by black bear. The grizzly rates are about double that, but black bears really, and in Ontario where I live, there are only black bears. So I was always kind of getting ready for that. Like I knew where, if I travel with bear spray, I have all sorts of bear training. You have to, if you're confronted by a bear, you have to be able to read their behavior to respond, to the point where if I'd be camping with friends or something and I'd say, "Okay, don't worry. If a bear comes, I've got this." And they're all like, "Oh, phew, Claire's going to go and wrestle the bear for us." But I was just kind of convinced. So I had this sense, and I've always spent my time like I'm going to die young. But really, I thought it was going to be bear. And then when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I was thinking about being vulnerable, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm going to be okay if the bear comes for me." And that's kind of where this book came from, because I thought maybe I'm talking about this, I sound like I'm being arty and it's a metaphor, but I mean this literally in a way.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I'm not sure I could stand up to a bear anymore, mentally or physically.
Yeah. I wonder about, carrying that belief that it would be a bear that did you in. You write in the book about, the almost like a hunger to like have that battle, because at least it would be a battle.
Yeah.
At least you'd be in the fight, and you could fight well or not.
Exactly.
Whereas cancer doesn't, they don't even throw up a scoreboard for cancer.
It's just the worst. It's like, and you get, my experience so far is you get news and you're like half naked in a blue gown, or like you're sliding in and out of machine.
Feeling warrior-like.
No, there's no swords involved, as it turns out, or not that I'm wielding anyway. I think that's it, that I realized I'd been worried about a bear or something that was going to come at me. But the whole time I'd been worrying about those things, the thing that will probably kill me is inside me. It's my DNA. I have a mutation called this. It's in the CDKN2A gene, which is a gene that slows the replication of cells. And that cancer is a proliferation of cells, basically. So I don't have the brakes like most people do.
Right. That they start growing and they just grow.
They go for me. Yeah.
There's no law enforcement agency inside of you that says,
unfortunately not.
enough.
No, and there's no bad guy. There's no one to shoot. Like
Yeah.
there's no fight. It's so unglamorous. And you do think of fighting for your life. And I've sort of, since I realized that, I've been sort of wondering about all these like fight metaphors we have with cancer too, because maybe that works for other people with environmental causes, but for me it's like, how do I fight myself?
We've been talking a lot about mortality. We've been getting into it, nature's brutal ways, but this book is also a love story in a bunch of different ways. I think the big love story that I took from it is it's your love of the outdoors, and how this cancer diagnosis forced that to change.
My surgeon, who's like a long distance biker and things, so I think the way I go out in the wilderness is like I go for a canoe trip for 30 days or I climb a mountain and I'm on a glacier. Like this isn't just like I'm going for a hike.
Yeah.
And it's about weathering the elements, how I go out, and I met my husband rock climbing in Joshua Tree in the desert. It's just what I do. So actually what my surgeon said was the ideal amount of UV exposure, which you get, even when it's cloudy, is none.
Yeah.
Because my skin's so susceptible to melanoma. And he said, well, of course that's unrealistic, but you have to try and aim in that direction. And I actually, for a while, I was starting to wonder if I'd overcorrected. And I went back and talked to him and I was like, I'm going for runs at the end of the day in the dusk, but am I being a little too, because people were sort of wondering if I was being a little too literal about his advice. And what he said was that I should try scuba diving at night. I was like, oh, okay. So you need the sun, you need vitamin D.
Yeah.
Everyone does. But for me, it's just such a huge risk.
Yeah.
So I've had to change. So the way I recovered from my father's death, after that, I went numb a bit. And just as a child, I didn't have the processing skills. But it was when I started going outside that I really started to recover and that I started to reconnect with people and I started to reconnect with the outdoors. So it became my coping mechanism. I'm very much one of those, the wilderness is my sanctuary people. But it really is. It just, when I'm outside, I have a purpose. And it's like, okay, climb that mountain, go. And it like channels all my energy. I love it. And so with my own diagnosis, I was almost grieving my own life this time, and none of my coping mechanisms worked. I wanted to go canoeing for a month. That would have helped me come to some equilibrium. Yeah. But I couldn't do all that.
Yeah. You couldn't just up and go for a run either. You had to wait till like
I run, but I run at the end of the day. So
well, that's what I mean is like you couldn't spontaneously like, what I need right now? Well, it doesn't matter what you need right now.
Well, and also what I didn't realize is how much I'd taken my health for granted. Like at first I was just absolutely outraged. Like I wanted to call the manager. I was like, I need to speak to someone about this because, sorry, do you know who I am? Like, I was like, this isn't just anyone. This is Claire Cameron. She goes out.
This is highly inappropriate.
I was so mad. I still kind of sometimes I'm like, are you kidding me? I need to go. And I'm very energetic. And I was absolutely, when I was a little hot-headed, my husband would say, why don't you go for a run? Yeah. So I still run, but I run at the end of the day.
I remember reading about this. And the thing I thought when you laid it out in this article, I was like, oh, Claire, like, I felt how much you'd lost.
It's such grief. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder though, as you talk about it in terms of loss, there's also a transformative aspect to it. I mean, to scuba dive at night, you would almost have to be a different kind of animal from the animal you are.
You're not me.
Right? You would
Yeah.
have to be not you.
Yeah.
Is there any part of that, of the diagnosis of what you needed to do with your life now, that felt transformative, or was it all fight and loss?
Well, so when I started researching, I had the operation and I had quite a lot of surgery on my back, and I was trying to recover. And I actually picked up my novel, The Bear, just because it seemed I couldn't write. It seemed so foreign to me that I had actually made up something in a Word document. I just couldn't believe it, and that people would actually read it. My creativity, I thought, had been cut out. But then I saw at the beginning, it said, I wrote a prologue to that book, just talking a bit about the attack as I understood it. And I'd written at the bottom, there was an oar, a broken oar found at the campsite. And I thought, well, that's weird. I thought it was a paddle. And then I went back into this cache of articles I had, and one said it was a paddle and one said it was an oar. And I thought, okay, so The Bear's one, probably like the last, second last book I'm ever going to have written. And there's a big mistake in the beginning. And it just started to drive me nuts. How could I have made that mistake? And then I started reading, and there were some conflicts with the timeline and that sort of thing. So I started getting in touch with a police officer, a guy who was in the search party. I just wanted to, that's how this book started in a way. I wanted to just answer those questions. In retrospect, I think I was getting myself up and out the door. And as I engaged with this investigation, I started meeting incredible people. I started spending great days under the canopy on the hiking trails rather than out in a reflective canoe. Yeah. And it just started happening naturally as like my curiosity turned outward, and I started re-engaging with the world in a slightly different way.
Yeah, yeah. The oar paddle distinction is one of my favorite things in this book.
Okay. I mean, on the surface, this book, it's like, oh, she had cancer, so she investigated a bear attack. It sounds a little odd. And it sounded odd to everybody. Like, I called up.
It's a good thing you have an agent, because that was the worst pitch I've heard for a great book.
But I remember calling when I started. I said I need to get to the bottom of this, but I didn't know what I was doing necessarily. So I called up this retired police officer, and I was like, "You said in the paper that it was an oar, but then I've read that it was a paddle." And he was like, "What?" And I was just obsessed with that detail, and I wasn't sure why. And then the more we talked, the more we together we kind of realized that an oar is much bigger and heavier. It's like 5 or 6 pounds. And they're like things you use with leverage. So they're in an oarlock on the boat, on a motorboat in this case. Whereas a paddle is much lighter, 2 to 3 pounds, and you use it with your hands. Yeah. So the fight, or what broke that oar, it did turn out to be an oar. And the amount of force to break an oar is entirely different than a paddle. So it turned out to be a very significant detail.
What I love about that detail and how you capture it in the book is the distinction comes up, but its significance far outruns your explanation for it. That we sense that whether it's a paddle or an oar is extremely important. We must figure this out. And those of you not steeped in the ways of freshwater navigation, you're just gonna have to follow along. And and it was all I could do to not Google difference between oar and paddle, where I just put myself in your hands and I was like, she's doing something here. I want to go with this. I'm going to withdraw both oar and paddle from the stream, and I'm gonna let this book take me down, take me in the direction of the current. Do you think about the reader who is going to be struggling with this, or does that not even enter your mind? Or do you think of a reader who won't struggle with this at all, who's right there with you and and even maybe has particular preferences about different types of paddle and the angle of their J-stroke?
Well, I think I get into it in the book, right? Like I talk about the weights and that, like how they're used and what you use them for?
You do, but it comes like there's some tension.
Oh,
It
yeah,
comes
yeah,
it comes
yeah.
late.
Yeah,
like,
it comes
like
late.
I had to hold off the Googling.
Yes. Okay. I see the Googlers among you. I mean, this is told a little bit like a true crime investigation.
Yeah.
So I'm dropping, and I listen to a lot of podcasts and I read a lot of investigations and stuff too. So I have some major the ground beef is another one. There's major clues that I am dropping through,
Yeah.
like you're following a mystery
Yeah.
along. So I did that. I hope the reader trusts me with that. And I sort of say that at the beginning too, that we're, there's 3 stories really. There's the couple and what happened to them. There's the bear approaching where he met the couple. And then there's my story of the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So in my mind, they were always going to come together for the end. And I think I do. I mean, all my books, I think, ask a lot of readers to come along with me. I think I write adventures or like, you know, they're not thrillers, but they're adventurous and you're going somewhere. You're on a journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned this earlier that you revisited your novel, The Bear,
Mm-hmm.
which felt foreign to you, like someone else had written it.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I imagine your first novel, The Line Painter, almost definitely feels like somebody else wrote it because that was your first novel, and you've written a bunch of books since then, and also just time of like watching yourself at work as a younger person. I wonder though, how do you feel about your most recent novel, The Last Neanderthal?
So I was having that problem, like being separated from my writing specifically after my operation and this diagnosis. Because I actually said to my surgeon, I think you slipped and cut out my creativity. Because I think it takes a lot of confidence to write. Like why would anyone want to read that, what I wrote? I don't know. I shouldn't ask. You can't ask yourself that is the point. But it's through the process of healing and actually writing this book that I started to find that again. So it was almost like this book in documenting exactly what happened in Algonquin Park that I started to figure out why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I kept saying to the people at the beginning, this bear was thought of as a monster and it was like incomprehensible. And I kept saying, no, I want to understand why. And people kept saying, that's impossible. You're not going to ever know why.
Yeah.
And I couldn't accept that. And it was in trying to answer that question, why, that I re-engaged with my ability to write fiction and to imagine. And that was so crucial because, as I mentioned before, I had this memory of my dad's horrible death that happened 3 years, to the age that I was. And all I could imagine was that. Mm-hmm. And it was in engaging in this investigation and this process that I started to be able to expand that view again. And it when your life doesn't go the direction you expect, I think it's a process of reimagining what could be next. Because, you thought you knew what was going to happen, but you don't. Mm-hmm. So what now? And you have to make it up. It's hard to make up a new plot. Mm-hmm. And I had to find that new plot.
Mm-hmm. I imagine writing another novel felt a million miles from possible.
Yeah, there was no way.
But you were able to write this, and you were able to write a work of nonfiction, even with this wonderful thread of speculative imagining that I alluded to, that we talked about earlier. Were there any models that you were thinking of like, oh, if only, I think I can pursue this obsession I have. I think I can dig up some facts. I think I can set a record straight, and I think that's a book.
I should say I quit this book several times, and I did the investigation, and I had all the documents and all the the what happened.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, this isn't a book, so I guess I'm done. And that was a weird way to spend 2 years of my life.
But, well, that's the thing. Is like when does a hobby become a book, or when does a hobby it's just a hobby?
And I was like, maybe I just hassled all those people for no reason. Like but I did think I have to quit this, and I guess doing all that research was part of my healing. But I hadn't quite found the fiction part.
Yeah.
So, and then the memoir part too sort of came separately when I realized this story isn't going to make any sense. My friend read an early version and she said, "That's great. So why are you so obsessed with bears? Like, what are you doing?" And at that time she was like, "Paddle versus oar. Doesn't seem that, and
Yeah.
without understanding my obsession, which drove my investigation, I don't think this book makes sense." So one book that comes to mind is I Am, I Am, I Am by Maggie O'Farrell. And I've interviewed her several times. I know her a bit. It's how many, is it 17 stories or 13? There's separate stories about the time she nearly died.
It's a prime number, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's just fantastic. And when I asked her about that, she said, well, I couldn't say, I'm Maggie and I was born in 1971 or whatever. And she didn't really want to begin at the beginning, but if she had the idea of like near death, that was kind of exciting. And then she could write herself in that way. And I took from that, one of the things in writing this book, and I wrote about this recently in the Globe. I was in an MRI machine and they were just, because I've had cancer since these first instances, and I'm going to be sliding in and out of an MRI machine for the rest of my life. And I was going in, and you have headphones on, and the woman said, "Okay, it's going to be 50 minutes, and then it'll be over." And I was like, "Okay." And so you're just trying to endure MRI machines. I'm sure people who are listening some of us have had them. It's very loud. You just want to get out.
Yeah.
And she said, okay, she said something like 45 minutes left. And I had this moment of like, is she talking about my life or the test? And I was like, so this is how I'm going to spend it a bit. Like I'm going to be in a hospital gown and an MRI machine. Maybe I can try, I have to be here now because this is the hand I've been dealt. So I started listening, and very strangely, MRI music almost sounds like that wind up. I called it music. It's not. It's like grinding magnets or something. Like it sounds like there's violence around you, but in a way, it's like just like the beat, like when a club is kind of winding up. And I started to be able to hear like melodies, and
Sure.
I was like, okay, make some lyrics. And it just and what's the tune that can go along with this? And I started. I mean, not a good song, but I started sort of composing along to the music. And I came out in just such a better state. And with these, with an idea for a song, which may become a story or something else. But I'm not saying it was pleasant, but it wasn't unworthwhile.
Yeah.
And it was kind of interesting. It turned my attention outward. And that, I think, is really what this book is about, is turning your attention outward. And that's where the love story comes. It's like your life is right now, day to day, the people you love, what you decide to do with the next 5 minutes. That's what's important. And that makes up a life.
Yeah. The epigraph of How to Survive a Bear Attack quotes Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who incidentally, is one of the great translations of Beowulf. We're not getting away from. We're not out of the mead hall yet. But you don't quote any of his poems. You quote the last message he sent to his wife before he died. Literally a text message, an SMS, if we can imagine the beloved the late Nobel laureate texting his wife. He texted, "Don't be afraid."
Yeah.
And this is
Noli timere.
Yeah.
In Latin.
How do you feel about dying? Is it fearful?
So writing this book and confronting all this is what helped take the fear out of it. And so, I mean, of course, sometimes.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, I had an terror, I would say, not just from dying, but a haunting memory of how my dad died. So he was 6'5", a tall, big man, and he must have been well under 100 pounds when he died. It was just, and his hair fallen out and barely lucid. So I had such a fear of that. So just of a long, prolonged, torturous death, and also my children having to watch and see me go through that. So in this idea of like turning your curiosity outward. I started to talk to in this book, there's accounts of like another woman who was attacked by a bear, Laura Darby. So we have very different experiences, but we had sort of similar traumatic stories. And she was saying talking to people is what's really helped me recover from this, because she was really mauled by a bear.
That is a harrowing sequence in the book.
She's the bravest person. Yeah, she helped me fill in part of the story, because we don't know what happened on that island exactly, but there was some clues left behind and then some things that I pieced together. And Laura was one of the people that helped me piece things together. But she was saying, she agreed to talk with me, and I was asking her if it was hard. She said, this is the only way I'm still alive, is being able to like get, and we had so much in common in our recovery stories. It was incredibly heartening talking to her. Yeah. You just sort of start to realize that you're not alone. Yeah. That's a huge thing, making connections with other people.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in and talking to me about this. That was it's a pretty good connection as connections go. Claire, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have been speaking with Claire Cameron, author of How to Survive a Bear Attack, a memoir. Find it and all of the books we spoke about, including several versions of Beowulf, apparently, at Kobo and Conversation's home on the web, kobo.com/conversation. There's a link in the show notes. Subscribe in your podcast player of choice to catch every episode. If you enjoyed this one, tell someone who makes you feel strong enough to fend off a bear. Kobo in Conversation is produced this time out and hosted by me, Nathan Maharaj. Thank you for listening.